Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Vestanland. This is episode 30, and in this episode, I finally finished the Nyrstad International Airport. This has been a very long process, and it's coincided with a busy time for me personally, so it's taken a while in real time as well. Um, and part of that is that I had to sort of redo a lot of what I had kind of done in terms of my initial building process. I had to change things around a lot, and that's what you're seeing here in the opening part of the episode. I deleted the plane stands and the concrete surface that I had put down. It just wasn't looking right. It wasn't doing what I wanted to do. And yeah, so I sort of changed strategy a little bit. I made each one of these slabs as big as I could, basically, just to make the process of laying down this concrete surface a lot easier. And the kind of elephant in the room is that I basically just gave up on making the airport functional in game. I just couldn't find out how to do it in a way that would make the airport look like passably realistic in the way that I wanted it to. I was disappointed by that. I really wanted to see planes flying around, especially since there were so many great custom assets of planes on the workshop. Yeah, so that was disappointing. But on the flip side, this gave me the chance to really customize the airport with a lot of other great assets out there. And yeah, I'm at the end of the day, I'm really happy with the decision. I'm really happy with how it turns out. I think you guys will appreciate that. And yeah, stick around to the end of the episode to see some really cool cinematics of all the little details I was able to put in as a result of not going for the functionality and instead focusing more on the realism. Yeah, again, I think it was the right call in the end. A little bit disappointing, at least for me, but yeah. Yeah, I'm not going to talk too much about the sort of concrete surface I'm putting down here because I talked about it a lot in the previous video. Obviously, it's the same idea. I'm still not exactly sure why airports do this necessarily, but it seems to be pretty consistent, sort of no matter where you are. And moving on to the kind of more custom stuff, the stuff that I was able to do because of the decision not to use the airport's DLC assets. I'm using, at least partially, this collection of runways and taxiways by Seb Nichols on the workshop. You can see I'm playing around with the taxiways right now. I decided, you can see right now, these are the ones that have the lines on them. I ended up going for the version without any lines because I wanted to put in my own lines and just, again, make it look as custom as possible. But I used the ones with lines just for this process of kind of laying things out and getting a sense of where I wanted everything to be. You can see I kind of started out by placing down kind of a stub of a taxiway in between each of these concourses. And then I was able to, this is what I was mentioning before about changing them to the one with no lines. And this is what really makes this area, as I was able to use the node controller to stretch out these nodes a lot. And you'll see this kind of creates an effect of having these different areas of the concrete surface sort of surrounding each of the concourses where the planes will be parked most of the time, I imagine. And this, I think, is what really was sort of the first point in which I was like, I really could see the vision of how this was going to work. You can see I'm laying out the runways here. I'll also go for the ones with no markings on them, again, to make sure I can put down my own custom markings. I went with the light runways and the sort of medium asphalt taxiways for no like particular reason. I kind of just wanted to have a little bit of a contrast. And I was sort of basing things off of a couple of airports in real life. And I saw this a couple times, so I figured it was at least kind of realistic to have that, have the color scheme look like that. Yeah, speaking of airports that I took inspiration from, I looked at airports that had kind of this sort of, being right on the water and having a lot of reclaimed land. In the United States, I looked at LaGuardia in New York and Boston Logan, obviously in Boston, Massachusetts. I also looked at Copenhagen International Airport in Denmark, Just any airport that had kind of was kind of coastal or had any kind of reclaimed looking land. Kind of, yeah, and I sort of tried to take some of the layout decisions from those airports and kind of roll them into my own. Again, there's no, I mean, I don't profess to being like a master with anything like aviation related necessarily. So I'm sure I made some mistakes with how the runways are laid out, but I try to base it off of things I saw in real life just to make sure at least it looks realistic. I mean, maybe there's, obviously there's things with the scale that aren't going to be perfectly right within game. But yeah, I think overall it does, the layout I chose, I think does a good job of capturing sort of what makes an airport look like an airport in a lot of ways. I chose to have this kind of like sort of like two-way taxiway here, which I think when I sort of dress it up with props and decorative networks and stuff will look really good. And then, yeah, having those kind of distinct areas of concrete surface around the concourses, I think was really helpful. And yeah, this is now the point where I'm getting into the actual detailing of the episode. Kind of, yeah, this is like the meat of the episode right here, where I'm putting together these custom jet bridges. I think it's Vasimir 22 on the workshop that put together a massive collection of custom airport props, which I used a ton of in this build. Right now, I'm using the jet bridge with the like kind of like the truss structure, and then adding some glass and some pillars here, and then you'll see I end up just copying and pasting this kind of basic structure around this one concourse. Again, trying to go with the theme of having like, I imagine this concourse is the most modern, and all of these jet bridges were probably kind of like manufactured at the same time, probably by the same company or something like that. So I think it made sense to have them be kind of have a similar theme. And yeah, I think the kind of modern steel look of these jet bridges really meshes well with the concourse that I built. And now I have a prop plane here, not a prop plane, but like a plane that is a prop in game, just to get a sense of how that kind of connection is going to work here. I kind of, again, I didn't necessarily do a ton of research. I more just did a lot of looking around on Google Earth to get a sense of how these jet bridges are laid out with the kind of, I've flown enough on airplanes to know kind of how they're supposed to look, at least kind of. But yeah, I try to mirror some things I saw in real life as much as possible anyway. And yeah, I kind of got this door in place, and I kind of like just shifted the plane in so that I could sort of get a sense of how big it was in relation to everything else. Obviously, the space is a little bit more cramped than it would be in a realistic airport. That's kind of unavoidable. But I think I was able to do like a good job of kind of having a compromise between realistic detail and sort of not realistic scale, but kind of making the scale look as realistic as possible, if that makes sense. I know that's been a theme of the series thus far, and yeah, this project was no different. But yeah, overall, I said it before, I'm really happy with how everything kind of came together. It took a while, a lot of trial and error, but at the end of the day, I think everything kind of really meshes together really well. Yeah, hopefully you guys agree with that. Now I'm adding in a few more props to this specific jet bridges here to try to give some variety. These all look like kind of like portable things. They kind of all are on wheels. I know, like, obviously there's the stairs, but then there's also like the baggage loader thingy, which, that's the thing that puts the suitcases in the bottom of the plane, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, you'll see kind of as I go through and build, I kind of scatter things like that around the airport, without really a specific idea of what they're doing, but just more that, they're sort of in the area. And yeah, I think that's sort of does the job there. Now what I'm doing is adding like a service road. Obviously this isn't functional, it's just a decorative network. But these like two like parallel white lines were something I saw in a bunch of different airports kind of around the edge of this concrete sort of plain parking area. And this is one of the places where I didn't add as much detail as I definitely could have, theoretically. I could have put down more decals and more signs and stuff, but just getting those sort of white lines down, I think, does the trick. And yeah, and you'll see later on when that sort of comes together, how realistic it looks. And I think that does a good job of kind of adding the right amount of detail to this area. You saw I also started placing down some of those yellow center lines for the taxiways. That's another thing. I probably could have spent more time trying to match those up to like real life situations perfectly, but it sort of wasn't, it just wasn't feasible in the end of the day. Um, so yeah, I sort of did the best that I could with the sort of the mechanics of the game, like how the terrain and various things work. And yeah, now I'm adding in some of these stop bars for the planes, one at each gate. I'm also using these custom plane stands, which again I'm converting to procedural objects. They're not functional to begin with; they're just decorative. But obviously, I changed them to PO so I could sort of customize the color. I decided to make them red, both because I saw that in real life, and also I figured I needed a little bit more color. It's kind of a wide expanse of like kind of grayish brown, and it was kind of boring to look at. So changing those all to red, I think, helps with that, kind of to break things up a little bit. I also added a few more props, a few more like the crates and stuff, just kind of lying around, a few of these like little baggage cart things. And then I added another sort of like crucial detail in this whole process was these kind of hatched line areas, kind of, just indicating where the jet bridges are and where like, I guess, planes can't go. I mean, I don't know exactly. I feel like that would be self-explanatory to a pilot not to go like right up to that spot, but I don't know. Now I'm adding, I believe these are the hold lines. That's what the asset's called, and I think that's what I'm imagining is that this is like, when the plane is parked, they have to stay behind this before the air traffic control gives them the go ahead, something like that. Again, that's my guess based on like just my viewing of Google Maps. If anyone has more aviation insight, feel free to leave it down in the comments. I'd love to know more about the specifics of this stuff. Also, feel free to go and check out the Discord server. The link will be in the description. That's a place where we can chat about stuff like this. It's stuff that I'd love to know more about. And I hopefully I did it justice, in terms of representing aviation just in general fairly well. On that front, there's a little bit more. I mean, I said this is like the end of the airport. There's still more to do kind of in the vicinity in terms of adding some like sort of light industrial and maybe some like cargo areas. So yeah, if there's any like glaringly obvious things that I missed that would be simple to put in, that would make the airport look a lot better in your opinion, feel free to let me know. I'd love to hear about that. There's also the next big project up in this area of the city is to add the airport like transit hub, which is gonna be the train and the metro and the monorail. I'm really excited about that. It's been a while since I've built like a train station, and it's one of my favorite things to build in the game. So I'm looking forward to that. You'll see that probably next episode. And yeah, again, if there's any specific places you'd like me to like take inspiration from or anything like that, feel free to let me know. I'd be happy to check stuff like that out. And yeah, getting back to what's on screen, you can see I'm continuing the same themes from before with stretching out the service road and adding those hatched areas under the jet bridges. I tried to vary the shapes a little bit, kind of here and there, while still keeping the same overall theme. Again, I think that does a pretty good job of kind of tying everything together, but also breaking things up and making sure it's not completely uniform. And yeah, I think that's like pretty much a theme that I've sort of come back to in various builds, obviously in the airport, but sort of across the city and the country of Vestanland. And yeah, I think that's a theme that I applied here and I think was helpful in terms of just creating this build, but also making it look good. You can see now I'm getting into building and detailing, I should say, more of the taxiway areas. I started adding those green taxiway shoulder decorative networks. I don't really know. I mean, obviously those are just sort of to hem in the actual taxiways. I'm not sure if they have any purpose other than just being visual. I chose to use the green ones just because I thought they looked really cool. I'm not sure. I don't know if the colors mean anything necessarily. Yeah, feel free to enlighten me. Like like everything else that I've been unsure of thus far. But yeah, again, I sort of, in terms of the visuals of the actual airport build, I think it's helpful to have. I sort of just chose the realistic things that were the most colorful in a lot of situations. I mentioned that with the red plane stand markings. Those green taxiway shoulders are kind of a similar thing where I wanted to just add a little bit of color just to like mix things up and make things more interesting. Um, and yeah, I profess that I did not know exactly like what any of those things mean necessarily, and they might have a more advanced meaning that I just wasn't familiar with. But um, regardless, these are all things that there's some really cool people on the Steam Workshop have like taken the time to create these things. They're based on real life. I've seen them on the Google. Um, so I don't feel like I'm making things up. But again, I do feel a little bit guilty in the sense that I don't know exactly what's going on necessarily. But yeah, like I said, I mean, I think I've done a pretty good job of kind of balancing everything, all the kind of different constraints of building an airport in this game. Obviously, the big sort of miss on my part is just not being able to get the actual planes moving around. I think it's a worthy sacrifice in the situation, just because, like I said, I mean, trying to use it's really honestly the main problem that I found was that using the vanilla plane stands was pretty much impossible without using the vanilla taxiways as well. And the taxiways just, I mean, they look pretty good, but they're just not good enough for the kind of build that I was going for. And they really, because they aren't completely flat, it's pretty hard to customize them in any way. And yeah, the textures, I mean, they look pretty good for the vanilla game. But I've been spoiled long enough with all the great assets available in the workshop, and I just couldn't sit by and let those go to waste in the Nyrstad International Airport. And yeah, I mean, again, I was looking forward to seeing planes like taking off and landing here, but I should be able to get trains coming in and out. I'll put some more I'll put some like housing and offices around here, so hopefully there'll be people walking around. I could probably add some like service cubes and stuff like that to kind of get things moving a little bit in the future anyway. But yeah, again, I sort of been rambling a little bit about the kind of the mechanics of the game and whatnot. Getting back to what's on screen, I've started placing down some of the markings on the runways. I initially was going to use the sort of the same runway with the markings of the markings on the network. I ended up changing that a little bit later on. You'll see what I do instead. I also added these, the green taxiway shoulder markings down this part of the runway. I didn't end up adding these on every section. I sort of just did it in the kind of the part here close to the terminal. I was sort of just imagining that this is the part where there's potentially planes like crossing paths and whatnot. The parts where like the runways kind of stretch off into the ocean. I didn't think there'd be much confusion in terms of where the planes are supposed to be there. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they should be there. That's an example of something that I could add, later on, just as a quick fix. You can see I'm kind of I'm connecting up these yellow centerline markings to the runways. These centerline markings, they're from the pack of like airplane decals and props and stuff like that, but they're actually they sort of look like a fence or like a wall almost. If I don't really do it, you can see it kind of there a little bit. They kind of extend into the ground a lot, so getting the terrain to work with that was kind of tricky. I sort of used a couple of tips and tricks that I sort of have picked up along the way to kind of manipulate those networks to my advantage. You'll see here, I was going to try to fill in the nodes of the runway with this procedural objects modified prop. I ended up deciding just to stretch it all the way end to end. You'll see I end up just just replacing the runway with the original, completely blank one. Then just sort of modifying with the procedural objects. Again, using that same prop of realistic airport markings. Speaking of those, another cool detail that I found looking at Google Maps was where these service roads cross the taxiways. There was this kind of black and white checkerboard pattern. This is something that I saw it in the pack and I saw it on the satellite view, and I knew I had to include it. It's just another really cool detail. Again, there's definitely more I could have done, especially with these like service road intersections. I decided just to outline them here. And yeah, I think that's okay. I think like I mean they sort of a lot of them have like stop signs and stuff, but I was starting to like really take a hit on the FPS, so I decided to just leave it at that, and then have those checkerboard patterns do a lot of the work, so to speak. Another little thing I added. This is something I actually forgot to add in other places, but was these little triangles for these runways, because I'm thinking these ones are one way, kind of almost like a road, like it's right hand side is going one way for the planes in the situation. I saw that that's another thing that I didn't really know if that was something that happened in airports, but I found examples of that online, so I kind of went with it. Again, it doesn't really matter in this particular case because the runway isn't, these taxiways aren't actually functional at all. But again, another like nice visual detail that I could add. And yeah, I didn't have like a specific prop or decal to use, so I just modified one of those ploppable pavement triangle shapes and colored it. It doesn't really match up perfectly with the center line, but I think that's okay. You'll see I scuff things up a little bit with some stains and other decals and stuff a little bit later on. So that's the type of imperfection that kind of blends in eventually. Yeah, you can see I'm adding these shoulder marking things. These are probably one of my favorite details that I added. Again, because of that sort of like pop of color that they add. Kind of to I mean, the airport is a pretty like dreary industrial place in a lot of ways. You sort of don't get that sense when you're inside one necessarily. It's like so oftentimes it's really crowded or it's like super modern and open. But when you look at it from above, you can tell it's just kind of grimy and like there's pavement and asphalt. And I guess there's kind of a there's an appeal to that, I guess. But I wanted to kind of break that kind of griminess up a little bit, like I mentioned before, with those extra colors. And I think the plane stands and the shoulder markings really did a lot of work in that respect. Yeah, you can see, and now I'm moving on to these kind of like hub and spoke type concourses that I built. I'm really happy with how these looked initially, and I'm even more happy with them now that I've added the jet bridges. I was imagining that each one of those kind of paneled roof things was going to be one gate. And I kind of added the jet bridges to match with that. I think that does a really good job. I think it works really well. I also added the windows, again, just sort of not part of the building or anything, but using procedural objects. I used the same technique as I did on the Norbakken Stadium build a couple episodes ago, using this kind of, I'm not sure what it's from, but it's like a bar prop. I guess they are window bars, but I just sort of blew them up and then colored them black to sort of form like a generic window frame. And then you'll see I use a piece of glass, convert that to procedural objects, and just use it kind of as the background for this area. And yeah, you see that's what I'm doing right now. I stretch it out, I color it a little bit darker, and then I use the same kind of procedural objects, like group of PO'd props, to make like a consistent window thing, like kind of throughout these concourses with the concrete walls. And again, I think that's another thing that works really well. It kind of ties things together. These windows, they look pretty similar to the other buildings I've been using, just being pretty simple and modern looking, but also a little bit different. So it kind of mixes things up and it makes a little bit of a nice contrast or a little bit of a different color. I think that's another thing that I like about how this airport looks. It was something I was really conscious of. I wanted to make sure that all of the different parts of the airport, you could tell, were constructed at different times. And I think you can really see that when you look at the terminals and the concourses and the gates and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, another little detail that I added, I just sort of glossed over almost. I added those kind of like warehouse doors where the service vehicles would theoretically go. I'm imagining that there's probably some kind of underground like service depot or just storage or stuff like that. That those like trucks and stuff, maybe like the catering and like the baggage claim and all that stuff. I didn't, obviously that's not like built in game, But yeah, I kind of had the kind of alluded to it there with those warehouse doors. You can see, and I'm also to continuing on the same themes of adding the same kind of hold lines and stuff like that. Obviously, an airport in particular, it's important for things to be consistent. Obviously, obviously, like throughout one airport, but also like among different airports, having kind of the same patterns makes a lot of sense. You can see this is like basically the finished detailed airport in terms of the actual concourses. I skipped over a lot of it in the footage just because it was really repetitive, a lot of copying and pasting. But yeah, you can see that that cinematic was like sort of kind of glossed over a little bit, but it was really cool. And you can see how all those concourses really came together in the end. Yeah, the last kind of chapter you could say of this episode is building and detailing these runways. It was like taking inspiration from real life. I was able to get a good sense of what these were supposed to look like. I did a little bit of research. I profess I do not remember exactly what all these markings mean, but I know I got them at least mostly correct. I'm pretty sure these bigger lines are where the plane is supposed to land. I might be wrong about that, but yeah, that sort of, they kind of have the like crescendoing like amounts of lines. That was kind of what I noticed. I couldn't find like a consistent number of lines necessarily. I kind of just fit in with what I had here. And yeah, I think it ended up looking really good. I also added the center line down the middle, obviously. And yeah, that was another thing that kind of tied things together. I liked how I was able to get obviously the scale of these runways and taxiways is probably a little bit distorted. I think it does it. I think when I sort of add the markings in, that was kind of the moment of truth for like whether or not this whole build was like scaled somewhat close to realistically, and I think it really is. You can see I'm adding just like kind of things around the edges, like the service road. It looks like appropriately a lot smaller than the runway. A lot of these like rocks and stuff. I mean, again, the sort of thing that I was really struggling with was creating a realistically scaled airport using the in-game assets, but also making it look fairly realistic. I mean, I've been rambling on about it in a couple of videos at this point, but yeah, this is kind of the time in the build for me, and hopefully in the episode for you guys, where you can really start to see like how all of those decisions come together and to create something that looks pretty realistic. Another little detail I'm adding is these hold lines for the runways. Again, I imagine it's the same as the taxiways, where like this is obviously where like planes that have landed or are about to take off or like have to wait to cross a runway and they have to stop before get the go ahead. Yeah, I think I lined those up correctly with like the solid lines being where the planes would have to stop. I'm pretty sure that's right. Yeah, again, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about that. Yeah, I'm very much a novice, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, again, any constructive criticism would be appreciated. I'm sort of lining everything out by adding these breakwater rocks, kind of outlining everything. And then this is another detail I added I think was really good. I added the kind of the numbers you see at the ends of the runways. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I researched this, so I know this is at least mostly right. It's like basically you multiply this number by 100, and that's like how many degrees from north you are. And you saw the one that has basically going like a little bit east of north. I used the number 1 because that's like 10 degrees. If north is 0 degrees. And then this runway is pretty much due east-west. That's why it's 9. It's like 90 and 270 degrees. Again, I think I got that right. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I added these little numbers at the airport hold line or the runway hold lines to kind of tie everything together. I've seen these. I saw these are like another like pop of color, but also another realistic detail that I saw and figured I could add. Yeah, just right off the top, a couple of other details I wasn't able to add. Obviously, there's a lot of like other signs that I could put in, like for the planes taxiing around and whatnot. There's also a lot of other decals I could put down that I didn't really have time to. one of the reasons why is that I was initially going to put down a lot of like grass props. Really, I started to, and then my FPS just like absolutely tanked. And I realized I had to like really limit that. So yeah, again, I sort of mentioned this earlier, but if there's like a super obvious thing I could add that wouldn't be super time intensive, please let me know. I'd be happy to put it in. But there are a lot of things that I thought about putting in that I realized I really couldn't. And it's just kind of how it is, unfortunately. The kind of last thing I add here is the kind of like skid marks for the runways. This is like such a cool detail that I was able to add. Also, like I mentioned, the scuffing up of like the taxiways to kind of blend everything together. You'll see I also add the air traffic control tower here at the end. But I'm rapidly coming to the end of the episode, so I want to thank you guys again for watching, and feel free to check out the links below. And hopefully I will see you in the next video.